When I first announced to run for the city council, 10-4-1 had already been voted on by the council, and that was kind of what people were thinking was going to be the plan. So when 14-1 came along, to be quite honest, I was kind of agnostic. I thought either plan was an improvement over the 8-3 plan, and in my particular case, the district that I would have run for under either 10-4-1 or 14-1 was going to be an open seat. So there was going to be no incumbent. So from a very selfish standpoint, I was going to have an open seat. There's going to be no incumbent. I realized that other people would run for it. But I didn't think originally that 14-1 would fly. I thought everybody had kind of coalesced around 10-4-1. That was the compromise. And it's important to remember that with 8-3, the three were at large. I mean, really at large in terms of citywide. Under 10-4-1, those four were quadrants. And so it seemed to be kind of a good compromise. It did require the council to be enlarged, which I think was another compromise. So when I first heard about 14-1, I thought either plan would work, but thought that 14-1 had a steeper uphill battle. But I think what a lot of people don't remember is that the original 10-4-1 is what was approved by the voters. And the original 14-1 is what was voted down by the voters. And so now as you look back, you think, oh, well, the citizenry must have got it right. Well, actually, the citizenry didn't get it right originally. And then the other interesting aspect was requiring Department of Justice pre-approval of the plans. And while both of the plans ended up being submitted to the Department of Justice, once again, 10-4-1 was not approved because they still had some of the vestiges of the at-large system, and nationwide, I think it was a bigger push to true single-member districts. And the Department of Justice did approve 14-1. So at that point, even though the citizens had originally voted the other way, really the only one that got approved was 14-1, and that's why Judge Buckmeyer ordered the elections be held under 14-1, and then later the charter was amended to include that. So I think sometimes now it's easy to look back and think, oh, we must have got it right the first time or got it right originally, and it wasn't. And that court case, of course, went on for 3 or 4 years, had the trial, but it was really kind of interesting that it really took that litigation to kind of force the change, and as true students of Dallas politics remember, there was originally the Lipscomb case years before, which once again litigation is what went to the original 8-3 from all single member, from all at large. So it took a while as well. It's interesting now as I look back, and as I originally said early on, I was fairly agnostic to 10-4-1 versus 14-1. With the clarity of hindsight and having been there, I can see the absolute advantages of 14-1, the absolute benefits of 14-1, and in hindsight, I'm really glad that 14-1 is what prevailed, because I do think that it made Dallas a better city. I think the greatest takeaway from 14-1 is the diversity and inclusion that has resulted from 14-1. And I'll give you some kind of data points. Would these have happened under 10-4-1? Maybe, but it would not have happened as soon. And clearly under 8-3, I don't think it ever would have happened. And so you can kind of look at it in different buckets. The first is the council itself. When that first 14-1 council was elected, had 4 African Americans and 2 Hispanics, which was the most diverse council ever. That was the highest number in the past. Generally, there were 2 African Americans and 1 Hispanics on the council, so that was an increase. Of course, in '95, had the first African mayor elected. In 1998, when Laura Miller won a special election for the North Oak Cliff seat, had a women majority council. When you really think about it, 8 women. In 1999, when Ron Kirk was reelected as mayor, for the first time, had a minority majority council. Once again, In the old system, either 10-4-1 or 8-3, that never would have happened as soon. And then, of course, in 1993, Craig McDaniel was the first openly gay elected council member. So from a diversity standpoint, the council moved forward light years as a result of 14-1 and having those single-member districts where residents could select the candidate of their choice. And that was the beautiful part about 14-1, is they always saw them as opportunity districts. There's no guarantee that a particular race or gender background would win, but it created opportunity districts. It also allowed council elections to be a lot cheaper. So imagine running citywide in a large council district. So when I ran, it was a much more economical campaign to run for a single member district. The second bucket is what I'll call the leadership, the senior leadership of the city. And so within 7 years of 14-1 in 1991, you had your first African-American city attorney. You had your first Hispanic city manager. You had your first, and she was a woman, first African-American city secretary. Once again, would those things eventually have happened? Yes, but I think because you had a diverse council who then looked at, hey, let's make sure we're looking at diverse candidates for these positions that the city council votes on happened. And so the senior leadership became more diverse. And the last thing, and this is something that I think a lot of students of history don't think about, which is the city boards and commissions. So when the charter was redone, and each council person was then able to appoint their own appointee to the park board or to the plan commission or to a number of other boards and commissions, most council members would appoint individuals that reflected their council district, and so and most times lived in that council district. And so what happened with these boards, there were advisory boards, and some of them were actual final deciders. The Landmark Commission sometimes in certain areas, the License and Permit Appeal Board. If you don't like their decision, you've got to go to state district court. You don't appeal it to the council, you appeal it to the state court. All of a sudden, those boards and commissions started to look like the diversity in Dallas. And you had a much more inclusive set of group of people. So when they looked at city policies, when they looked at city programs, when they looked at city initiatives, you just had a much more diverse and inclusive group that was doing that could then say, hey, well, in my background or my experience or my neighborhood, let me tell you what's going on. And so in those three buckets, the council itself became more diverse and inclusive, the senior leadership of the city became more diverse and inclusive, and the city boards and commissions became more diverse and inclusive. And I think that is the real plus, advantage, benefit, lasting legacy of 14-1. A lot of people thought that the council was going to be too big and kind of unwieldy. Having served on the council, I think it's just about the right size. I think any bigger, it starts to become more like a legislature and it's a little more difficult. But the size allowed people to know each other, to talk. You could disagree without being disagreeable. So I think one thing that concerned people was, oh, it's going to be too big. And I think that was a fallacy. I think the other thing that some people were concerned about was that 14-1 would end up with these little fiefdoms. And so you'd have 14 kings or queens of their district. Some of that has come true. I think in certain cases, other council members will defer to that council person from that district if the issue is in his or her council district. And sometimes that's okay, but sometimes there are issues or assets that I think really have citywide importance and significance. And so I think sometimes the council probably needs to be more willing to not defer to that council person, but I think that has come true a little bit. But I think the most important thing is you went from having, a couple of 100,000 people in a council district to between 90 and 100,000. And I think it really brought the council person closer to his or her constituents. For those of us who would, shop in our district and go to the restaurants in our district, I mean, it was not uncommon for a constituent to recognize me and bring up the barking dog, or the garbage that didn't get picked up, or the pothole, on Maple Avenue, and so I think that's good. I think to be closer to your constituents is good, and a plus from 14-1. And I think the other thing that 14-1 resulted in is probably some people who otherwise either couldn't have been elected or wouldn't have been elected. They were much more grassroots, a lot more localized, being famous or known locally, could then run for city council. And as I mentioned, because of the smaller districts, it costs less money. So if you wanted to put out yard signs or do mailers, yeah, you could do it, but your universe of voters was a lot smaller, and so the cost was a lot more manageable. And so you had some people on the council that probably, because of 14-1, were able to serve. Before that, I'm not sure they could have been elected against somebody who's maybe more famous or had more money in those kind of elections. In my council district was a neighborhood called Love Field West. It was just west of Love Field, in between the airport and Harry Hines and kind of Mockingbird and going back to Denton Drive. Strong neighborhood, old neighborhood, but because of the old configurations, had always been kind of overlooked. And so through my council service, we were able to get on the bond program, the Guarwilo Recreation Center, got it approved, got it built, and literally the weekend before I left office, had the groundbreak. Had the opening, the ribbon cutting, and so I think there are a lot of stories like that the historical old timers who probably saw some of the neglect and saw some of the being passed over, or saw some of the other neighborhoods being favored, I think would be pleased when you look at some of the spray parks. They're in parts of towns that maybe didn't get them in the past. Recreation centers now, they're in parts of town because they have a council person that can go fight for them and advocate for them. Same thing I think with some libraries. You have some libraries now in neighborhoods that maybe in the past were overlooked. And so I think our forefathers and foremothers are looking down and smiling at the progress that Dallas has made under 14-1. From 1991 to now, you still have cases over single-member districts, still have litigation about redistricting. So it's interesting that while Dallas kind of moved forward in that regard, you still have some school districts, some other cities that are still doing it. And it's really the fundamentals under the constitutional arguments are the same. So equal protection and the right to vote, and kind of one vote. In the old days, one man, one vote. Now, one woman, one person, one vote. And it's kind of interesting. But then the other thing is not only the single-member districts, but how that also dovetails with redistricting. Because you can have 14 single-member districts, but the way that the districts are created may or may not create opportunities for that diversity. And in fact, my council district under 14-1 in 1991 was kind of like a long L. It started up at Bachman Lake on the other side of Love Field, came down Harry Hines and Maple Avenue into downtown, had what I called the south part of downtown, so City Hall, Convention Center. The north part of downtown was in District 14, which had a similar L shape because they were kind of laid on top of each other. And then my district went south into the Cedars, into Cadillac Heights, and then the leg of the L went over to East Dallas, and in fact went out as far as by Samuel Grand, and out I-30 by Dolphin Road. And so when you think about it, that from north of Love Field to kind of south of I-30, south of downtown, it was kind of a funny looking district. And District 14, which lay on top of it, had a similar trajectory, but it was done so that District 2, that I represented, would be an Hispanic opportunity district and had about 60% Hispanic population, but District 14 had primarily an Anglo population. And so it's a combination. And actually, if you look at redistricting and single member districts around the country, you have to have both pieces. Just going to single member districts doesn't necessarily create these opportunity districts. So when you actually do the redistricting, so it is kind of an interesting, and the Dallas experience I don't think is different from a legal argument or from the constitutional claims than a lot of cities around the country that have also moved to single member districts. I mean, it's a pretty similar, legal basis of what the argument is. And like I say, in North Texas, when you look at some of the other cities and school districts who have also kind of followed and moved to single member districts, I think it's kind of a trend that's kind of happened over time.